Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Jen.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me today is Dr. Jennifer Friberg. Jen is the Cross Endowed Chair in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning here at Illinois State. How you doing, Jen?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. You actually, your academic appointment is in Communication Sciences and Disorders.
I'm a speech pathologist by discipline.
Okay, so what got you into the scholarship side of teaching and learning?
Well, it's interesting. I actually came to my position here at Illinois State to teach. I've always been teaching primary as my interest. And I took a workshop, maybe my first or second year here on campus as an assistant professor. And Kathleen McKinney at that point was the Cross Endowed Chair. And I learned a little bit about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And it was sort of a light bulb moment for me. It was an aha kind of realization that, wow, as I practiced as a clinician, I was using evidence-based practice. I'd prescribe a particular kind of treatment for a patient based on the best available research to support that choice. And I thought, gosh, it's really, really intuitive that there'd be similar research to make those kinds of choices in the classroom as a course instructor. And so my interest in SoTL was born at that workshop that day.
So what is the role of the Cross Endowed Chair on our campus in particular? And my understanding is it's pretty rare, like nationwide or even globally, to have an endowed chair in this field.
That's correct. So Illinois State, to my knowledge, is the only university that has an endowed chair in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And that came about because K. Patricia Cross, and those of you who are classroom assessment technique users, Angelo and Cross, that's our K. Patricia Cross, is the co-author of that book.
We've talked about it often on this podcast. So
Very good. Very good. Well, her father was a physics professor here at Illinois State University. And so she endowed the chair in his honor because teaching was incredibly important to him and influenced her work, and she wanted to honor that. You're absolutely right, Jim. Most universities that have an arm that deals with the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and you may hear me call that SoTL.
Yeah,
which is
and that's fine.
The acronym for that, but just to be very clear,
we are a university after all. We do like our acronyms.
We like our acronyms. Most universities that have an arm for SoTL roll that into the Teaching and Learning Center, and there's good reason for that. For those universities because there is overlap between what the Teaching and Learning Center does and what someone who's interested in SoTL does. That's not the case here. We've kept the efforts separate between the Teaching and Learning Center and the Endowed Chair and SoTL. And I think that has its positives, and I can talk about that a little later, maybe. But as I was saying, the traditional or predominant model is to roll SoTL in with the Teaching and Learning Center, and it kind of is then integrated with other programming and efforts that your traditional teaching and learning centers may do. That said, there are a lot of universities that don't have a SoTL arm. And so, I would consider SoTL to be a continually emerging and changing field. It is global as a discipline, and it's increasing in its involvement or the level of involvement by faculty, particularly in the United States right now.
What interests me about SoTL is the idea that it is something that draws people from all of the disciplines. It's not like someone goes to school to become a SoTL practitioner
or scholar,
per se. It is something that develops out of like your own experience and interest in finding evidence-based support for our teaching. So how do folks on our campus, how would they get involved with SoTL? What would be some of the questions that maybe becoming involved with your office would help them answer?
Sure. Well, to answer that, let me tell you a little bit about a continuum that we talk about in SoTL. It actually was developed by Kathleen McKinney. She published it in 2007, and I lovingly refer to it as the Teaching Continuum. I'm not sure what she called it originally, but the ideas are hers, the name is mine. But she talked about the difference between good teaching, scholarly teaching, and the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. The idea being that if you and I walk into our classrooms, we hope that we're good teachers, that we have good intentions towards our students. We want the best for them, and we design courses that have that sort of idea in mind, that we are well-intentioned individuals. The next level up from that would be scholarly teaching. And the idea there is you're still a good teacher, but you recognize that there is research on teaching and learning, and you go to that research and you read it and you implement or apply the things that you learn from that research in your teaching. So you pick specific pedagogical strategies or assessment schemes, whatever the case may be, because it's been successful somewhere else. So you're using evidence-based educational practices as a scholarly teacher. The next step from that then would be being a scholar in teaching and learning. So engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning as someone who's actively researching, typically your own students, to better understand what's happening in the classroom and hopefully improve your practice and your students' learning down the line.
Cool.
So you asked what people at ISU would do or what they might be curious about. I think it's the things that keep us up at night as teachers. You have that thing in the back of your head that just you're not sure if it's working in your classroom. Did that thing I did today have an impact? Did my test really get at what I wanted it to? Are my students learning during study abroad? What are they learning during study abroad? And so, anything that happens surrounding the issue of our students learning could spur a SoTL project. And because SoTL's in our strategic plan, also very unique and wonderful here at ISU.
Right.
Because there's funding for this kind of research, we have workshops through my office, and it is considered meritorious in terms of tenure and promotion. There is a real interest in SoTL, which I think is fantastic.
So just so people have a better idea when we're talking about SoTL, what are some of the research projects that have been done on our campus in this light?
Sure. Let me tell you about a project that I did with 3 of my colleagues in CSD. We would laugh as we'd talk anecdotally amongst ourselves that our curriculum seemed siloed. And I don't know if that's a term everybody would understand, but when we talk about patients with communication disorders, we talk about them as having speech or language or fluency disorders. And what we found is because we taught those specific kinds of disorders in separate classes, our students were having a hard time integrating different disorders across the same client, even though multiple disorders can and often do, result within the same patient. And so we said we're siloed, and our students were really showing that in the clinic and in some of the decisions they were making. And so we decided to develop a series of integrated projects across our curriculum. And we studied the outcome of those projects to see if we did more integration across our curriculum, it might be effective for our students as learners. Would they be more able to be effective clinicians? And we found across the board that yes, they would be. And so we used the results from those SoTL studies to revamp our entire curriculum, which is now in its first year of completion.
So that's fascinating to me because it's kind of the opposite of the thing I proposed originally, which is I have something I want to research. This is more of I have a good idea, or I think it's a good idea. I want to measure to see if it actually works or not.
It could be.
Yeah.
I talk to faculty about problems and wonderments and opportunities. And I think those are the places where SoTL projects are born. Problems don't have to be a bad thing. It can be a time constraint. It could be, I teach a class at 6:30 at night, and it's a 3-hour class, and the students have been in the building since 8 a.m. How can I engage my students? That's a problem, An opportunity might be a study abroad. I'm taking my students to Spain for 10 days. It's an opportunity to measure what is the impact in terms of learning during a short-term study abroad, which we know very little about. And a wonderment might be something like, gosh, I heard this thing could work. If I implement it, can I measure any kind of different learning that maybe I wouldn't have thought to look at in another context? So the problem, the wonderment, the opportunity all kind of lay the groundwork to say, hey, there's something here I can collect some data on and better understand my students.
And of course, you don't just assist with the design of the study. You help folks throughout the process through publication, right?
Absolutely. So a lot of folks start their interest in SoTL with a workshop. So they'll come to an intro to SoTL workshop. And during that process, an idea for a project is sparked, and they'll start to develop a process for their their project and an idea or outline. We have grants through my office to support research on teaching and learning. There are individual consultations. I'm happy to help with IRB, processes, procedures, and completions. And all the way through, I read drafts. I help folks find journals that might be good homes for their work or other dissemination outlets, because we certainly aren't limited to the traditional paper or conference presentation. We have faculty on campus who make documentaries with their SoTL work, and we have faculty in the School of Fine Arts that have done theater productions based on what they've learned about their students' teaching and learning.
And of course, you also have a couple of, let's call them latter-day channels of communication. So you have there is Gaisis. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Gaisis, people are forever asking how it's spelled and how you say it.
Yes.
But Gaisis. And there was actually a contest to name our internal to ISU SoTL journal. Because our motto is gladly we learn and teach, Gaisis means gladly in Latin, and it just happens to have the letters ISU in the middle.
Yeah.
So from a marketing standpoint,
Right.
visual marketing, it's not so bad.
Right.
But so we do have Gaisis that is edited by myself and some other folks who are interested in SoTL. We kind of offer that opportunity around campus. And that's published every spring. And generally we feature 4 to 6 different papers or posters or other kinds of presentations featuring our faculty and students' research work in teaching and learning.
And then you also have the SoTL blog that you're doing. And you told me a very interesting fact before we started recording today about that.
Yes. So we started the SoTL Advocate blog in 2014. And it was one of those efforts where we were posting something new every week. We're trying to post resources or supports for SoTL researchers across the spectrum of experience. So we're doing some low-level introduction to SoTL, advocacy and outreach, all the way through some real theoretical, applied, mega-level, multi-institutional, cross-disciplinary kinds of SoTL information. Just trying to be relevant to a lot of people, which seemed very unwieldy. And at the time, Kathleen, who was still the Cross Chair, and I was at that point a SoTL Scholar Mentor working with faculty on campus in a slightly more limited position than I am now. We decided, hey, let's try a blog. And as we populated that blog, we had no idea if people were reading it. We really didn't understand what the impact might be of that blog, but we put our heads down and we kept working. And I went to iSoTL, which is the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning conference a couple years ago, and people started calling me the blog lady. They said, oh, you're the one who has that blog. And then the next year it was more of an impact. And I've recently figured out that WordPress has metrics. Who knew?
There you go.
And started looking at the impact and reach of the blog. And it's been read in 46 countries. We get downloaded or clicked on, I guess the terminology is, 50 times a week, generally speaking. And I've had over 12,000 unique visitors to the site. So it actually has been a really great tool to share what we're doing here at ISU, but then to understand what other folks are doing. I have invited blog contributers pretty frequently now.
Something for me to aspire to. I want to be known as the pod person, I guess.
Pod person. There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
You're the pod guy.
I'm the pod guy. Hey, so bringing it back to your own teaching, what have you learned from your SoTL experience that has made you a better teacher?
Good question. Only one thing?
Well, no. I mean, let's go over the list.
Well, I would say, first of all, I can learn as much from my students as they can learn from me. And that's sort of always been my philosophy in the classroom. And so I really appreciate understanding their perspectives and learning more about their experience in my class so that I can continually improve what I do. So, I think that's the entry-level understanding, is that there is a continuous improvement process that really has to happen in order to keep your teaching chops relevant and to, at least for me, be the teacher that I want to be. I still... The heart of SoTL is in the classroom, and I love being in the classroom. And so that's probably the first realization. The second is that even if I think something is wonderful, it isn't always true. And, in my very first workshop that I attended as a new faculty member, I remember Kathleen saying, you're going to do something in your class soon and you're going to say, wow, that went really well. But that's just your perception. And, did your students actually learn or did they just like it? There's a difference. And so, really having that realization that, just because I like something doesn't mean my students have learned. And so just that loop of needing to constantly evaluate and assess, how effective was that thing that I did? Is it worth my time? In a more, I think, focused sort of way, I've learned a tremendous amount about what my students learn, particularly outside of the classroom. So I've focused a lot of my work on out-of-class learning. So things like study abroad, service learning, those kinds of contexts. What are my students bringing to the table now that they might not have brought had they not had that out-of-class learning experience. So it's really opened my eyes in particular to some of their interpersonal learning, how they're learning about themselves and where they fit in the big, wide context of our profession or that sort of,
Do you share your research or SoTL research in general with your students? Is there a value to saying, hey, look, there's evidence to show that if you do X, you will gain Y?
100%. Yes. So generally speaking, I spend the first week of any new class teaching my students about what we know about teaching and learning, because so many times we expect that they know how to be good students, and that's not necessarily the case. I can say, gosh, how many of you underline when you read? How many of you knew that maybe that wasn't the best thing for you to do? And here's why. If you have distributed practice over time, research has said you're going to be a better learner, you're going to remember it better, and you'll have better connections. And so they find it fascinating, especially if they can benefit from it.
Sure.
But I'll go back to my participant groups and say, hey, you remember how you guys let me use your data for this project? You consented and you let me access your reflections or your work or whatever the case might be. This is what I learned from you guys. Because the benefits to your immediate participants aren't always evident in SoTL, right? I'm going to study you so the next students can benefit, right? And so keeping the students in that information loop is, I think, really beneficial.
Jen, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology and about the Cross Endowed Chair in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning by going to our website, ctlt.illinoisstate.edu, or you can go to Jen's website, which is SoTL.illinoisstate.edu, and we'll link to everything that we talked about in today's episode. Until we talk again, happy teaching.